Ashes. She felt alone. The old room gave her two distinctly opposing feelings, comfort and a hollow heart. The windows were tainted with streaks from rain and a poor paint job, the aged wooden floor covered in remnants of hay, dirt, and wood. Miscellaneous items surrounded her. A neon orange sled to her left, a plastic trash bin to her right, and an old blue chair directly in front of her. A tiny, gaudy Christmas tree draped over old pieces of her home. Shutters not up to par, old wooden siding that had been long replaced by a much more durable substance, a broken motorcycle part over here, a child's play chest over there. Items now declared obsolete. Though the younger items were few, it seemed to her as though her entire childhood could be summed up by a stranger with one glance into the quiet, creaky attic-like space. Rain hit the roof of the old building and it reminded her of a tiny mouse army with all the little mice running around in their royal blue uniforms, carrying toothpicks and safety pins in preparation to fight against their sworn enemies. It must be interesting to be a mouse, she thought. Perhaps there is a mouse out there thinking the same, but about her. She closed her eyes and thought about her life, friends, family, relationships. She thought about religion, she thought about God. She had been told many times by the people around her that a life without God is not a life at all. She needed to find religion to find happiness. She needed to find religion to save herself from being damned. Hell, quite the concept, she thought. Seems so serious when they say it, why does it sound so bland when I say it? Hell, she said out loud. Nothing special. The mouse war pounded heavily now. The climax of the battle approached as she swayed her head back and forth to the music filling her head. No particular arrangement, just notes and hums here and there. It played to the sound of the wind against the windows every so often, and she stopped her swaying to wrap her arms around her legs and hug them closely to her chest and chin. She closed her eyes and her lashes swept against her wrist. But as soon as she closed her eyes, they flew open to the tiniest sound on the miniature door hidden behind a motorcycle seat and handlebar set. She lifted her head cautiously and allowed her eyes to flit around the door frame. It was not a knock, but rather a bump, as though someone accidentally let his or her elbow slip against a picture and it bounced lightly on the wall. She parted her lips to call out but thought better of it. No one could be there. The door led to the crawl space between the wall and its exterior counterpart. As she stared at the door, her caution ebbed away and the space filled with gentle curiosity. She cocked her head and out from the keyhole fluttered a butterfly. Lovely, she thought and smiled. The butterfly swung around the small space and grazed under her forearm. She crinkled her nose in silly fascination as it brushed her shoulder and landed on the doorknob to the miniature door. As she began to turn, she saw out of the corner of her eye a spark from the door. She turned back and watched, astonished and terrified at the same time, as the butterfly's wings ignited and hissed. The flames crawled up towards its tiny body, leaving a trail of warped, white-gray wings. The smell snaked its way to her while she stood frozen in place. She could not bring herself to move to cover her nose, but instead tilted her head towards her feet and felt her face drain of blood at the sight of her shoes. They were bright orange laced with yellow flames. She let out a scream as the flames quickened their pace up her legs. Pain shot through her like 1,000 skewers, burning into her bones. As the flames reached the metal on her belt, the pain she thought could never possibly be worse heightened to a level so intense she would faint. But she could not move, she could not even close her eyes. She stood like a witch tied to a stake on a pit of fire. She shrieked once more, but she knew that no one would hear her. Her eyelids finally closed, lashes singed away. As the pain became so intense she could no longer feel it, though she could not feel calm. The memories of all the terrible things she had caused in her lifetime played in her mind. Even the things she had not done but had imagined doing caused her to feel a deep, searing guilt. When she lifted her eyes open once more, she turned her cheek into her pillow. She let out a breath but threw her legs over the side of her bed and retched onto the floor. An icy finger traced its way down her spine, lighting up all her nerves, and she found the chills ironic. Only a dream, she thought to herself. But for some reason, this notion could not bring her comfort. She smelled something which made a lump appear in her throat. She clung to her bed sheets and felt something small brushing up against her fingertips. Glancing down, she could not help but let out a small cry. Scattered over the sheets were ashes and parts of singed eyelashes. She sat on the edge of her bed, bile seeping into the cracks of the floor, chills running down her spine, sheets covered with small pieces of hair and ash. Here, she felt very much alone. 100,000. It might happen one morning that you wake up home alone. This could be normal depending on your situation, but this morning will be different. While your environment will all seem exactly the same, you'll notice that everything is quieter than normal. If you go outside, you will notice a distinct lack of anything like birds, insects, or people. As far as you travel, you will not encounter another sentient human being. The entire world will be intact, but empty except for yourself. There are currently over 100,000 missing persons cases in the United States. Some are just normal cases of murder or kidnappings, but in others, the disappearance cannot be explained and no remains of the person are ever located. SpongeBob. Excerpt. The SpongeBob Lost episode is a creepypasta story about a legendary bootleg video of the TV show SpongeBob SquarePants. The episode is said to be cursed and many of the people who have seen it have either died or mysteriously gone missing. This image was taken from a corrupted bootleg video of a lost episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. The episode is almost entirely composed of incomprehensible static, jumbles of colors or just black screens. The audio seems to be heavily distorted, with a loud, droning buzz occasionally interrupted by shrill metallic screeches. The bootleg tape itself was found in December 2004 by a group of 5 teenagers who were rummaging around in a trash can behind an abandoned mental institution. Of these 5 individuals, 2 have since committed suicide, 1 has gone missing under mysterious circumstances, another refuses to comment on the tape, and the last hastily agreed to hand over the only known copy of the episode to investigators, shortly after learning about the suicide and disappearances of his other 3 friends. Those who have seen the episode say that there is only one short sequence that can be viewed. The image above is taken from this scene, in which the static on the screen gradually lessens and SpongeBob is seen standing in a darkened room. He is slouched over and looking downward with a somber look on his face. His eyes are bloodshot and it looks as if he has been crying. After about 10 seconds, he blinks slowly and lets out a big sigh. Then he reaches out and takes a bottle of pills from a nearby table. The colors keep flickering from light to dark as SpongeBob grips the bottle tightly and a single tear rolls down his face. The colors start flickering faster and faster, and in the background, the screams and cries of children can be heard. Then, the sound drops out and is replaced by absolute silence. Still blinking ominously, SpongeBob quickly twists the lid off the bottle and tips all of the pills into his mouth. The screen twitches and the animation grows darker. Barely visible in the gloom, SpongeBob clutches his stomach and collapses onto the floor. Froth spews from his mouth and he vomits pale orange bile all over himself. Then, he lies motionless until the screen returns to static. The current whereabouts of the tape are unknown and it is suspected that it was destroyed by the authorities. Most of the people who claim to have watched it are dead. The only thing that remains of the lost episode is the single still image you see above. Many people claim that if you stare at the image for a long time, strange things are supposed to happen. Candle Cove. Excerpt. Candle Cove is a creepy story about an old TV show that some people vaguely remember watching years ago. Net Nostalgia Forum. Television, local. Skyshale 033 subject. Candle Cove local kids show. Does anyone remember this kids show? It was called Candle Cove and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found reference to it anywhere, so I think it was on a local station around 1971 or 1972. I lived in Ironton at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember it was on at a weird time, like 4 p.m. Mike_Painter65 Candle Cove local kids show. It seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland and was 9 years old in '72. Candle Cove, was it about pirates? I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave talking to a little girl. Skyshale 033 Candle Cove local kids show. Yes. Okay, I'm not crazy. I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls, real low budget. His head was an old porcelain baby doll, looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't remember what station this was. I don't think it was WTSF though. Jaren_2005 Candle Cove local kids show. Sorry to reassure CT this old thread, but I know exactly what show you mean, Skyshale. I think Candle Cove ran for only a couple months in '71, not '72. I was 12 and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was channel 58, whatever station that was. My mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I remember. It took place in Candle Cove, and it was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called the Laughingstock, and Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily. And there was calliope music constantly playing. Don't remember the girl's name. Janice or Jade or something. Think it was Janice. Skyshale033 Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. Thank you Jaren. Memories flooded back when you mentioned the laughingstock in Channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face, with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like it was swallowing the sea and it had that awful Edwin voice and laugh. I especially remember how jarring it was when they switched from the wooden plastic model, to the foam puppet version of the head that talked. Mike_Painter65 Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. Haha, I remember now too. Do you remember this part Skyshale? You have to go inside. Skyshale033 Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. Mike, I got a chill reading that. Yes, I remember. That's what the ship always told Percy when there was a spooky place he had to go in, like a cave or a dark room where the treasure was. And the camera would push in on Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside. With his two eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw and the fishing line that opened and closed it. It just looked so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above really tall, narrow teeth. Kevin_Hart Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about 5 when this show was on. Nightmare fuel. Jaren_2005 Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. That wasn't the villain, the puppet with the mustache. That was the villain's sidekick, Horace Horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on top of the mustache. I used to think that meant he had only one eye. But yeah, the villain was another marionette. The Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then. Kevin_Hart Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. Jesus H. Christ, the Skin Taker. What kind of a kids show were we watching? I seriously could not look at the screen when the Skin Taker showed up. He just descended out of nowhere on his strings, just a dirty skeleton wearing that brown top hat and cape. And his glass eyes that were too big for his skull. Christ almighty. Skyshale033 Re. C. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin? Mike_Painter65 Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. Yeah, I think so. Remember his mouth didn't open and close, his jaw just slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why does your mouth move like that?" And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl but at the camera and said, "To grind your skin." Skyshale033 Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory, a bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended, the show faded in from black, and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces, and they were just screaming, and the puppets and marionettes were flailing spastically, and just all screaming. The girl was just moaning and crying like she had been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare. I used to wet the bed when I had it. Kevin_Hart Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. I don't think that was a dream. I remember that was an episode. Skyshale033 Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. No, not possible. There was no plot or anything, I mean literally just standing in place crying and screaming for the whole show. Kevin_Hart Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. Maybe I'm manufacturing the memory because you said that, but I swear to God I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed. Jaren_2005 Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. Oh God, yes. The little girl, Janice, I remember seeing her shake. And the Skin Taker screaming through his gnashing teeth, his jaw careening so wildly I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off and it was the last time I watched. I ran to tell my brother and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on. Mike_Painter65 Re. Candle Cove Local Kids Show. I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was little in the early 70s, when I was 8 or 9 and if she remembered a kids show, Candle Cove. She said she was surprised I could remember that and I asked why, and she said, "Because I used to think it was so strange that you said, 'I'm gonna go watch Candle Cove now Mom,' and then you would tune the TV to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show." Expressionless. Excerpt. The Expressionless is a strange creepypasta story written by Ivy Sear. It was based on the disturbing image you see below. In June of 1972, a woman appeared in Cedar Sinai Hospital in nothing but a white gown covered in blood. Now this in itself should not be too surprising, as people often have accidents nearby and come to the nearest hospital for medical attention. But there were two things that caused people who saw her to vomit and flee in terror. The first, being that she wasn't exactly human. She resembled something close to a mannequin, but had the dexterity and fluidity of a normal human being. Her face was as flawless as a mannequin's, devoid of eyebrows and smeared in makeup. She had a kitten clenched in between her teeth, her jaws clamped so unnaturally tightly around it to the point where no teeth could be seen. The blood was still squirting out over her gown and onto the floor. She then pulled it out of her mouth, tossed it aside and collapsed. From the moment she stepped through the entrance to when she was taken to a hospital room and cleaned up before being prepped for sedation, she was completely calm, expressionless and motionless. The doctors had thought it best to restrain her until the authorities could arrive, and she did not protest. They were unable to get any kind of response from her, and most staff members felt too uncomfortable to look directly at her for more than a few seconds. But the second the staff tried to sedate her, she fought back with extreme force. Two members of staff holding her down as her body rose up on the bed with that same, blank expression. She turned her emotionless eyes towards the male doctor and did something unusual. She smiled. As she did, the female doctor screamed and let go out of shock. In the woman's mouth were not human teeth, but long, sharp spikes. Too long for her mouth to close fully without causing any damage. The male doctor stared back at her for a moment before asking, "What in the hell are you?" She cracked her neck down to her shoulder to observe him, still smiling. There was a long pause. The security had been alerted and could be heard coming down the hallway. As he heard them, she darted forward, sinking her teeth into the front of his throat, ripping out his jugular and letting him fall to the floor, gasping for air as he choked on his own blood. She stood up and leaned over him, her face coming dangerously close to his as the life faded from his eyes. The doctor's eyes filled with fear as he watched her calmly walk away to greet the security men. His last ever sight would be watching her feast on them one by one. The female doctor who survived the incident named her, the Expressionless. There was never a sighting of her again.